Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. Don't touch me tonight. She said it with a smile, like it was some casual joke, but I felt the words land like a blade in the middle of my chest. That smile was the worst part, like intimacy with me had become a punchline. I stood there for a moment, stunned, but I didn't argue, didn't ask what she meant. I just looked at her, memorized that smirk, and let the silence do the talking. She thought she'd scored a victory. She thought I would retreat to the couch, sulk, maybe beg for affection like I had in the past. But I didn't. I walked away, calm, collected, already calculating. Because that one line ended something I'd been holding together with both hands for far too long. That night, I lay beside her in the dark. Her back turned, her phone lighting up the room with messages I wasn't supposed to see. She scrolled, laughed softly at whatever was on the screen, then set it down like nothing had happened. My side of the bed felt like the edge of a cliff. I didn't reach for her, didn't breathe a word. I stared at the ceiling, the words still echoing. Don't touch me tonight. The truth hit me harder than the rejection itself. She hadn't wanted me to touch her in a long time. The difference was that now she finally said it out loud. And once something is spoken, you can't unhear it. By morning, I was someone else. Quiet, sharp, detached. I got up before her, left the house without making her coffee, without a kiss, without a single word. I sat in my car in the driveway, staring at the dashboard, and felt something I hadn't felt in months, clarity. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't rage. It was the clean precision of a man cutting ties in his mind before the world even knows. The days that followed were the beginning of a silent storm. At breakfast, I sat across from her, scrolling my phone like she used to. No questions, no jokes, just distance. She tried small talk about work, about a friend's birthday, about nothing at all. I nodded once. No reaction. She kept waiting for sarcasm, irritation, anything. But there was nothing left to give. That night, I came home late. I'd gone to the gym for the first time in years, poured everything into the weights instead of into her silence. When I walked in, she was sitting on the couch in a satin robe, glass of wine in her hand, like she was setting a stage. You're late, she said, casually rehearsed. Didn't realize there was a curfew, I replied, dropping my keys. I could see the flicker in her eyes, like she wasn't expecting that response. Like she suddenly realized the script had changed. I didn't stay in the living room. I didn't ask about her night. I walked upstairs, calm, silent, leaving her there with her wine and her questions. And for the first time, it wasn't me wondering where she stood. It was her. That was the shift. The moment she stopped being untouchable and started to panic. She didn't know it yet, but that one smile, that one dismissive sentence, had opened a door she couldn't close. And I had already stepped through it. I was done touching her. Now it was her turn to reach for something that wasn't there. The silence became my weapon. At first, she didn't notice. She thought my quiet was just another phase, another mood that would pass if she ignored it long enough. But this wasn't withdrawal. This was strategy. I stopped reaching across the void she had created years ago, and for the first time, she felt the space. At breakfast, I scrolled through news on my phone while she talked about her manager, a rescheduled meeting, a birthday she barely wanted to attend. I nodded once, never looking up. No smile, no follow-up, nothing. She kept watching me, waiting for me to break the silence, but I didn't. It was strange how powerful that stillness felt. Like I'd been holding my breath for years and finally exhaled. That night, I came home late again. She was waiting, the same satin robe, the same glass of wine, like a stage actor repeating lines in the hope of a different ending. You're late, she said again, softer this time. I dropped my keys, washed the dishes she'd left behind, and replied, better than I've been in a long time. It wasn't just words, it was truth. She stared at me, confused, maybe even unsettled. The next evening, she tried harder. Lipstick before I got home. Dinner set on the table with candles burning. Pasta from scratch, something she hadn't made in years. I sat, ate quietly, thanked her for the meal, but nothing more. When she brushed her fingers across mine, I pulled my hand back like I hadn't even noticed. Her smile faltered, and for the first time in years, she looked uncertain. This was working. She had built her control by rationing affection, withholding attention, making me feel invisible. Now she was trapped inside the same silence she had created. She was tasting the emptiness I had lived in for years, and I could see the cracks forming. The following days were a study in her panic. She began sending me texts during the day, something she hadn't done in months. Hope your morning's okay. What do you want for dinner? Miss you. I didn't ignore them. I answered with precision. Thanks. Doesn't matter. All good. Each word was deliberate, like a scalpel cutting through her illusions. She wasn't used to this version of me. Detached. Unreachable. Not begging. Not angry. Not emotional. Just gone. She forgot that silence isn't weakness. Silence is a choice. And I had chosen it. One night, I caught her standing in the hallway, watching me pack a gym bag. Her eyes flicked over me like she was trying to solve a puzzle. I zipped the bag, walked past her without a word, and left. That look on her face told me everything. For the first time, she was afraid I might not come back. And she was right to be. I knew the exact moment the balance shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting, no confrontation. It was the quiet panic in her voice when she called me at work in the middle of the day, something she never did. Her tone was light, too light, almost rehearsed. She said she just wanted to hear my voice. I let the silence stretch until she filled it with a nervous laugh before hanging up. That's when I knew this wasn't affection, it was fear. She felt the distance, and it terrified her. That night, I came home even later. She was dressed up like we had plans, makeup done, hair curled, as if she had been waiting for me to rescue her evening. She smiled too brightly and said maybe we should go out, maybe try that new place downtown. I set my jacket down, calm, steady, and told her I already ate. Her face fell just slightly before she forced the smile back. She said maybe tomorrow. I nodded, walked upstairs, and closed the door. For once, she didn't follow. 2 days later, I began rerouting my paycheck into a private account. Quiet, clean, invisible. I canceled subscriptions she didn't know I paid for, streaming services she had always assumed just existed. That night, Netflix didn't load. She sighed loudly from the living room, waiting for me to fix it like I always had. I didn't move. I let her stew in the silence of a broken login. Small cracks in her comfort, invisible but deliberate. At the same time, I was rebuilding myself. I started spending more time at the gym, buying better clothes, and sleeping through the night for the first time in years. She noticed, of course. She asked where I'd been, who I was with. I answered with one word, people. That word hit harder than any argument. She wasn't used to being on the outside of my world. A week later, I caught her folding my laundry, something she never did, pretending not to check the receipts in my pockets. She was searching, desperate for clues, but I gave her nothing. No explanations, no reassurance. Just the steady silence of a man who had already left in every way that mattered. And that was the real shift. She had built her power on the belief that I would always fight for her, that my loyalty was permanent. But now she was the one chasing. And the scariest man in the world isn't the one who screams or begs. It's the one who lies beside you at night, eyes open, heart already gone, while you're still pretending nothing has changed. And she was starting to realize everything had. I didn't expect to find anything that night, but I checked anyway. Her phone was left charging on the nightstand while she showered, screen lighting up with a stream of messages. I didn't touch it, didn't scroll, didn't snoop. I just read the previews flashing across the lock screen. Enough words to confirm what I'd already suspected. Flirty emojis. Late night plans. A name I didn't recognize. That was all it took. I didn't confront her. I didn't storm into the bathroom demanding answers. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, calm, almost detached, as if I were watching someone else's life unravel. Because in that moment, it wasn't about betrayal. It was about confirmation. The puzzle pieces had been sitting there for years. Now they fit. When she came out wrapped in a towel, she saw me sitting there, quiet, still, and for the first time in a long time, she looked nervous. She asked if I was okay. I told her I'd never been better. She frowned, searching my face for cracks, but I gave her nothing. That silence unnerved her more than any shouting ever could. The next morning, I left earlier than usual. She sent me a message asking if we could have dinner together, just the two of us. I didn't respond. That evening, I stayed out late, driving aimlessly, ending up in a quiet diner on the edge of town. I sat there with a cup of black coffee, staring at the neon sign flickering in the window, and realized I wasn't lost anymore. I was free. When I got home, she was waiting in the living room, hair done, makeup perfect, like she thought she could charm her way back into control. She asked if I wanted to sit with her, maybe watch something together. I told her I was tired and went upstairs. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, but I didn't look. Days turned into weeks, and the cracks spread wider. She grew restless, suspicious, even paranoid. She started hovering around me, asking where I was going, when I'd be back, who I was with. The same woman who once dismissed me now fought for scraps of my attention. And I gave her nothing. One night, I heard her crying softly in the dark. She thought I was asleep, but I was awake, eyes open, listening. The same woman who once smiled and told me not to touch her now wept into her pillow, reaching across a bed that felt like ice. I didn't move. I didn't comfort her. Because the truth was, I wasn't hers anymore. And the silence she once used against me was now the very thing tearing her apart. The first real fracture came 2 weeks later. By then, I had stopped being just quiet. I was absent. I moved around the house like she was furniture, spoke in short, polite phrases, and never initiated anything. The distance grew so heavy she finally broke. One evening, she asked if I wanted to go out for dinner. Her voice was casual, but her eyes were searching me like I was a stranger. I told her I wasn't feeling it and went back to my book. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. The next morning, she touched my arm lightly as I was buttoning my shirt. It was the first time in weeks she had reached for me. I didn't pull away dramatically, just shifted slightly, enough for her to feel the rejection. Her hand froze in the air before she pulled it back like she'd been burned. I saw the realization flicker across her face. For the first time, she was the one chasing, and I was the one walking away. That night, she set out a bottle of wine and 2 glasses on the coffee table. She smiled softly and said maybe we should have a drink together, like old times. I stared at the glasses, then at her, and simply said I was heading to bed. Her face fell, the smile collapsing into something hollow, something desperate. I left her sitting alone with 2 untouched glasses, and I slept better than I had in years. It only got worse for her after that. She began hovering around me, testing me in small ways. Lingerie she hadn't worn in years suddenly appeared. Little jokes she thought would make me laugh. Even cooking meals from scratch, as if effort could erase years of neglect. But it was too late. I ate, thanked her politely, and walked away. No warmth, no spark, no reaction. Just distance. The more I pulled away, the more she unraveled. She started sending long texts during the day, filled with smiley faces and questions about my schedule. I replied with single words. She lingered in doorways when I was on the phone, pretending to tidy up, trying to hear if I was speaking to someone else. I let her wonder. I let her drown in the ambiguity she once weaponized against me. And then came the night I didn't come home until midnight. I had been at the gym, then took a long drive through the city, breathing in freedom. When I finally walked through the door, she was sitting on the couch, wide-eyed, like she had been waiting for hours. She asked where I'd been, voice trembling just slightly. I looked at her, calm, collected, and told her I'd been out. That was all. Then I walked past her, leaving her in silence so thick it nearly choked her. The same silence she once used to control me was now the very thing tearing her world apart. And she still hadn't realized. I was never coming back. It was around the 3rd week when the consequences of my silence began to ripple beyond our walls. She wasn't just unsettled anymore. She was unraveling in front of me. I caught her pacing the kitchen late at night, phone in hand, typing and deleting messages before setting it down again. When she thought I wasn't looking, her eyes darted to me, searching for any sign, any reaction. But I gave her none. One evening, her sister called. I could hear her voice from the other room, low and urgent, asking if everything was okay between us. My wife laughed nervously, said we were fine, that I'd just been distant. She painted me as the problem, a sulking husband pulling away. I listened quietly, not because I cared to correct her version of events, but because I knew the truth always surfaces. Lies rot from the inside. The next night, I came home to find her at the dining table, dinner set for 2. The plates were arranged carefully, candles lit, wine poured. She had dressed up like it was an anniversary. She smiled too wide and said she wanted us to start fresh, to reconnect. I sat down, ate the meal, thanked her politely, but my eyes stayed cold. When she reached across the table, I moved my hand away like it was instinct. Her smile broke. She excused herself, but I heard her crying softly in the bathroom. Meanwhile, I was building a new life in silence. I rerouted more money into a private account, cut off her little comforts, subscriptions, luxuries, conveniences she never realized I managed. One by one, they disappeared. When Netflix failed to load, when packages stopped arriving, when the housekeeper canceled because the invoice wasn't paid, she turned to me, confused, irritated. I shrugged, offered no explanation. The control she once flaunted was slipping through her fingers. And then came the night she snapped. I returned home late again, gym bag slung over my shoulder, and she was waiting by the door, eyes sharp with desperation. She demanded to know where I had been, who I was with, why I was pulling away. I listened calmly, my face unreadable, and then walked past her without a word. She stood frozen, trembling with anger, with fear, with something she couldn't hide anymore, powerlessness. Later that night, I lay in bed awake, listening to her breathing uneven beside me. She shifted closer, hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on my back. For the first time in months, she was the one reaching for me in the dark. But I stayed still. I didn't turn. I didn't speak. Because she was finally learning the truth. The man she thought she could dismiss with a smile was no longer hers. And the silence she used to control me was now the cage she built for herself. By the fourth week, the tension in the house was unbearable for her, not for me. I had grown comfortable in silence, but she was suffocating in it. I caught her watching me constantly, studying every move as if I were a stranger she couldn't predict anymore. That frightened her more than anything. One evening, she broke the silence with a trembling voice. She asked if we could talk, said she felt like I was slipping away. She tried to smile, but it was thin, fragile, barely holding. I looked at her for a long moment, then simply said there was nothing to talk about. Her lips parted, searching for a response, but none came. I left her there, sitting in the kitchen with words trapped in her throat. Her desperation escalated after that. She began sending me photos during the day, of her at the park, at a cafe, even old memories of us. She was trying to pull me back into her orbit, but every attempt only revealed how far I had drifted. I replied with single words, polite but cold, each message a reminder that she no longer had access to me. Then came the night she tried a different tactic. I returned home late and found her sitting on the couch in tears, makeup smeared, wine glass trembling in her hand. She looked up at me and whispered that she was scared of losing me. The woman who once dismissed me with a smile now begged with wet eyes in the dark. I stood there, silent, watching her unravel. Then I turned and walked upstairs without a word. Her sobs followed me down the hall. But what she didn't know was that I had already taken the final steps. I had met with my lawyer. I had secured everything: accounts, property, assets, all neatly separated from her reach. She still thought she had time, that maybe she could reel me back with tears and nostalgia. But the paperwork was already moving. She was fighting for a man who had already walked away in every way that mattered. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same woman who once told me not to touch her now reached for me in the dark, crying into an empty pillow. And I remained still. Because the truth was, I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to prove a point. My silence was louder than any argument. She wanted to play a game of power, but the game was over. And the moment she realized it would break her far more than it ever broke me. The collapse came faster than I expected. By the fifth week, her confidence was gone. The woman who once carried herself like she had control over everything now moved through the house like a ghost, afraid of the silence she once weaponized. She hovered near me constantly, asking harmless questions, pretending to care about my day, forcing smiles that never reached her eyes. Every gesture reeked of desperation. One Friday night, I came home later than usual. She was waiting by the door, her hair done, makeup perfect, wearing the dress I used to love. She smiled nervously and said she thought we could go out, just the two of us, like old times. I looked at her, steady and calm, and told her I already had plans. The words crushed her. I saw it in her shoulders, the way her smile fell before she quickly turned away. She asked who I was going with, but I didn't answer. I left her standing in the doorway, staring into the silence I left behind. The next morning, I caught her rummaging through my desk. She froze when I walked in, pretending to straighten papers. I didn't call her out. I let her squirm in her own paranoia. Later, she checked my phone when I left it charging, scrolling desperately, searching for proof. I had nothing to hide, but the fact that she was searching told me everything. She was drowning, clawing for control, and finding nothing but air. That night, she broke again. I heard her crying in the bathroom, muffling the sound with a towel. When she finally emerged, her eyes were swollen, her voice small. She asked if I still loved her. I didn't answer. I looked at her, calm, unreadable, then turned back to what I was doing. She stood there for a long moment, waiting for something that never came. Then she walked away, shoulders trembling. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. I had already shifted my accounts, secured everything I needed. I'd begun making plans for a new place, a new life, a version of myself untouched by her games. The transformation was almost complete. I wasn't just detached, I was free. And she knew it. She could feel it in the way I no longer looked at her, no longer cared to ask, no longer even acknowledged her attempts to bridge the gap. She was reaching across an ocean, and I was already on the other side. The same woman who once smiled and told me not to touch her now cried alone in the dark, reaching for a man who had already disappeared. And the silence between us had become permanent. The breaking point came quietly, not in some grand fight, not in an explosion of anger, but in the smallest of moments. One evening, she set the table again, trying to lure me back with a meal and soft music playing in the background. She wore another dress I hadn't seen in years, hair curled, eyes desperate. When I walked in, she smiled and told me she just wanted us to have one nice dinner together. I sat down, ate calmly, thanked her for the food, and stood to leave. That was it. No compliment, no warmth, just the cool finality of indifference. Her fork clattered against the plate as she stared at me in disbelief. I heard her whisper under her breath, asking how I could be so cold. But I didn't answer. I walked upstairs, leaving her sitting alone at a table set for two, with only her silence for company. Later that night, I lay in bed awake, listening. She came into the room quietly, slipping beneath the covers. For a long time, she didn't move. Then, in the dark, I felt her hand brush against mine. Not demanding, not playful, pleading. I stayed still. I didn't pull away, but I didn't respond either. And that silence cut her deeper than rejection ever could. She turned over, shoulders shaking, her quiet sobs filling the room. The next morning, I woke before her. I looked at her sleeping face, tear-streaked even in rest, and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. The woman who once smiled and told me not to touch her now cried for me in her sleep, begging without words for something she had already destroyed. By then, my decision was final. I had finished moving the last of my accounts, secured the lease on a new place, and prepared the papers. She still thought she had a chance, that her tears might rewrite history, but the truth was, she had already lost. She just hadn't realized it yet. That evening, she tried one last time. She cornered me in the hallway, eyes red, voice breaking, asking if we could fix this, if we could start over. I looked at her, calm and detached, and walked past without a word. She called my name, louder this time, but I didn't turn back. Because when a man has already left in his heart, there's no force on earth that can bring him home again. And she was beginning to understand that the silence she once wielded had become her own prison. A prison where she now cried alone in the dark. The final act wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. One morning, I left before dawn, carrying only the essentials. Clothes already moved, accounts already secured, papers already waiting for her signature. By the time she woke up, the house was different. My shoes were gone from the hallway. My jacket no longer hung by the door. The silence wasn't temporary anymore. It was permanent. I didn't leave a note. I didn't know her explanations or apologies. She had spoken her truth months ago with a smile. Don't touch me tonight. That one sentence had been enough to end us. Everything since then had only been the echo of that moment, replaying until I finally acted. When she realized I was gone, I wasn't there to witness it. But I imagined her pacing the house, opening closets, checking drawers, searching for me in the spaces I used to fill. I imagined her sitting at the dining table set for two, staring at the empty chair across from her. I imagined her lying awake at night, reaching across cold sheets, crying quietly into the dark. The same woman who once laughed at my affection was now drowning in the absence of it. Her messages began almost immediately. First short, frantic ones asking where I was. Then longer, emotional paragraphs begging me to talk, promising things would be different. I didn't reply. Silence was the only response she deserved. The man she thought would always wait had already walked away. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt myself. I filled my time with the gym, new projects, dinners with friends I had neglected. My world grew brighter without her shadow over it. I remembered who I was before she reduced me to background noise, before she rationed affection like it was a currency. I wasn't broken. I wasn't bitter. I was free. And she was left exactly where she had placed me years ago, in silence. Except now, she was the one staring at the ceiling at night, wondering when the distance had begun, realizing too late that it started the moment she dismissed me with a smile. I never raised my voice. I never begged. I never even explained. I just stopped. And in the end, that silence spoke louder than any words ever could. She once said, "Don't touch me tonight." And I never touched her again. Now she cries alone in the dark, haunted not by my anger, but by my absence. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.